pull up this week?
No, he's in Seattle. He leaves for Seattle in a couple of hours, and he'll be there till
Well, I'm glad you know that.
he gets back at 11 p.m. Thursday night, and he leaves at 6 a.m. Friday morning to go to
Good. What was it?
Santiago, Chile, and then over to Easter Island.
Ooh.
And he's going to be there for about
Why can't you
3
go with
days.
him? How fun.
Well, he's going. He's part of a group, a meeting, and
I would love to go there.
well, what I've told him is I've always wanted to go too,
Yeah,
and so,
whatever.
but I don't know
Right.
if I want to go because I've just read about it and it seems so exotic, or if I really want to go. So his assignment
Okay,
is to
tell you.
figure out
See what time it is.
if I
If you
really
really
want to go.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, we
Camp
don't-
Aunt is fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
She's,
good.
Yeah.
recovering.
Oh, great. Oh, good.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, I
you,
just
thank
always
you.
think it's
I
most
didn't realize, was the surgery today?
Yeah. it is.
efficient if people
Because it was
just
supposed to be
highlight the
yesterday.
points
yeah,
versus
and they were-
re-arguing things, so.
That's
Okay.
right. That's right. But it was
It's on.
today.
All right.
They were scheduled for today.
Hello? I'm not on yet. Hello? Number 9.
Back on Friday.
Number 9. Number 9.
And it's our anniversary.
Hi. Hello.
Good thing you got back just
Just
in
in
time.
time.
Janine?
You'll be so tired. though.
Janine?
You guys celebrate that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, go out to
Thank
dinner
you.
some-
Good afternoon. Wow, there you are, ready to go.
I'm here. I'm
Thank
ready.
you, Ms. Fisher. That was very good.
This will be 28.
All right, we are reconvening a little later than I said, but thank you all for being prompt. It is now 2:18 on that clock, just to
May I
be
ask
precise.
a quick procedural question?
You
before we
absolutely
start?
may.
In looking at the email that was sent out yesterday from Amel about the rebuttal period, and Ag got a collective 5 minutes for all 4 petitioners. We were just asking if any remaining time that we have that we're allocated, we could potentially use some of that towards rebuttal if needed.
Here's my reaction to that, which is, which seems reasonable. I think the point of rebuttal is to be able to just succinctly sum up what it is that we should need. I'm not inclined to give you, then it would be 20 minutes. And I just think it's not really what the purpose of rebuttal is.
Right. We're not
So-
asking for 5 each. We're just saying there might be some minutes remaining that we didn't use in our.
Right, but it might be as much as 15 minutes. And so it's just because you don't have your 4th person. And we've asked a lot of questions. So I'd be inclined to say somewhere between 5 and 10 is fine, but not a full
Great.
20.
And it's just as needed. We might not need any of it.
That's, you might not. And I also want to add that I've decided to also give the Environmental Justice Panel a chance at rebuttal. We hadn't given them a chance at rebuttal just because they weren't parties, but it just will complete the set better. So I will, both for the kinder and gentler chair that I'm trying to be, we will take another break in the afternoon, even if it's short, after the last panel and before the series of rebuttal, which it may be just 20 total minutes, but it could be longer because we could have a lot of questions. So just so people know, I'll give you a chance to collect your thoughts and talk amongst yourselves about how to use your 5 minutes, and in your case 5 to 10 minutes. But and that what should allow you during the course of the rest of the testimony, just listen carefully with open ears to the testimony as opposed to having to scribble what you're going to say next. So I hope that's
Yes,
helpful
thank
to
you very
people.
much.
Okay, Ms. Fisher.
Yes,
Take it away.
Carrie Fisher with the California Farm Bureau on behalf of the 7 county farm bureaus within the region. I'm also speaking and providing these suggestions on behalf of the Growers Shippers Association and Western Growers. We wanted to make a few suggestions and recommendations that were also provided in comment letters that we submitted. To begin with the expert panel, we thank Darren for providing some more helpful information on the panel this morning. We have a few thoughts on that, and that would be just to recommend that the recommendations coming forth from the expert panel are technically feasible as well as economically feasible, that they maintain California's agricultural industry, and they're also guided by the reasonable standard in the water code. We have a few suggestions for the composition for the members that will make up the panel. We suggest experts in agronomy, irrigation management, groundwater hydrology, production agriculture, an agricultural economist, a public health expert, an agricultural policy or legal expert, a representative from CDFA, and a representative from the State Water Board. And with regard to the issues, we think the projected procedures in which the different advisory committees members would have some say, and we agree with that, and we need to make sure that the scope of issues are definitely well articulated and that stakeholders do get some input. The proposed...
Pardon me,
Yes.
you can stop the clock. It sounded like an incredible number of opportunities for input.
Yes.
Hopefully that satisfies your...
Yes, we're just reiterating the stakeholder input in terms of coming up with the scope of questions to begin with, and then as it goes on, the further input that Darren outlined this morning. So with regard to the expert panel, the proposed order characterizes the decisions to be interim while the expert panel is doing their determinations, and we just have a few comments on that. We do have some concerns with maintaining the interim recommendations in the proposed order during this time, just because of the expense and the burdens that growers are putting forth to comply with the 2012 Ag Order, and it's difficult for our various members to invest in new technologies, especially in light if these expert panel recommendations are going to come forth, say, in April of next year. There's a very short window of trying something new that they might now have to completely change in only a few months. So we suggest that the State Board either suspend certain provisions while the expert panel is deliberating, or add in a reopener provision in the conditional waiver, in which the conditional waiver can be reopened to look at these provisions once the expert panel process is complete. With regard to provision 11, which is the third-party compliance option, we support the changes that were proposed to provision 11. The use of third-party programs is very important throughout all of the entire state, including the Central Coast region. Third parties have an expertise to provide technical assistance to growers. They know growers usually on a better level than regional board staff can get to know them. And also, as pointed out by the proposed order, the regional board staff just don't have the time or the resources to really work with growers on an individual level. The third-party group can also confirm the veracity and effectiveness of growers' efforts, thereby alleviating concerns that we heard this morning about the good faith efforts as proposed in the proposed order. This standard was said to be too vague to assess compliance and implementation, but with the use of third parties, we think that this good faith efforts standard can be correctly utilized. Notwithstanding these positives, we do just have a few suggestions on provision 11 to make sure all of this is encompassed and works correctly. First off, provision 11 uses a couple inconsistent terms that just make the reading and the interpretation somewhat inconsistent. It references alternative water quality management practices, and then it references water quality improvement projects. And these two different terms are kind of thrown out here and there, and it does lead to some confusion and doesn't provide a sufficient amount of flexibility for third-party groups or programs such as those put forth in the agricultural alternative. So in order to not limit third-party programs to only those that offer alternative management practices or projects or alternative monitoring and reporting programs, we would suggest that the reference to alternative water quality practices and an alternative water quality improvement projects be revised to refer only to water quality management programs. So just using one term instead of going back and forth and creating some confusion. This would be broader, and it would just allow flexibility for a more comprehensive alternative program that could be developed. Regarding provision 11's evaluation criteria for third-party water quality improvement projects, the order only references projects, but appears appropriate for water quality management programs. To remedy this, we propose two different revisions. Under the evaluation criteria labeled chance of success, we would suggest including pollutant source load reduction estimates as one of the demonstrable options for indicating success. So the chance of success criteria should read, projects must demonstrate a reasonable chance of improving water quality, and here's the new language, and or pollutant source loading reduction estimates. With regard to the criteria entitled project monitoring and reporting, currently it suggests that edge of farm monitoring is actually the preferred method. To ensure that there is no mistaken preference given to edge of farm monitoring, we recommend that the reference to edge of farm language be stricken as follows. Monitoring points must be representative, and monitoring results should provide indicators of water quality improvement and the efficacy of a project or a program. So it strikes out the middle language with regard to edge of farm. So this revision does not eliminate edge of farm monitoring if it's deemed necessary for that specific program or project in question, but it just eliminates any sort of suggested bias that that's the only thing that you could do. We do have an ask for a clarification. The proposed order adds criteria specific to third-party monitoring and reporting programs, stating that such reporting must be on a scale sufficient to track progress in small subbasins. However, there's no definition of what a small subbasin would be, so we would ask for potentially a clarification on what that would be. We also suggest a deletion, and this would be with regard to the Technical Advisory Committee provision. We don't feel that it's necessary. Should the Central Coast Water Board be unable to establish and maintain a technical advisory committee with the specific representatives that's listed in the proposed order, then third-party proposals will be ineligible for executive officer consideration, making the whole entire provision 11 null and void. So as it's currently written, if you can't maintain the exact number of people that have to be on the TAC, then the entire thing would go away. So we think that with the proposed order's new language already within that proposed order, allowing interested parties to seek review of executive officer approvals and denials, all parties are provided with a fair opportunity to seek review of an executive officer determination with respect to the third-party alternatives. With regard to groundwater monitoring, we don't support the individual groundwater monitoring for compliance determinations and trend monitoring as outlined in the proposed order, and it gave various reasons why those types of monitoring are not supported. However, we do support individual groundwater monitoring to the limited extent that it only be retained solely to protect public health. In order to accomplish this, we have some proposed revisions to provision 51, and that would be to revise the provision to clearly specify the intended purpose of the individual groundwater monitoring, which is limited to ensuring that domestic on-farm wells actually being used for drinking water meet drinking water standards for nitrate. This is a little bit of a long provision, so I'll try to go through it. The revisions aren't till the end, and I'll tell you when they start. So provision 51 would read, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 dischargers must conduct groundwater monitoring and reporting in compliance with the MRP orders, and then it lists the orders numbers, or alternative monitoring and reporting programs approved by executive officer as set forth in finding 11 and condition 11, so that the Central Coast Water Board can evaluate groundwater, and here are where the changes come, used for drinking water in agricultural areas, and identify domestic wells that are being used as a drinking source that exceed drinking water standards to prioritize areas for the protection of public health. Why we propose these revisions is the proposed order concedes that groundwater monitoring for compliance or trend monitoring is inappropriate. Further, the expert panel is tasked with determining appropriate structures and methodologies for monitoring for long-term nitrate control efforts, and these revisions would just clarify the purpose of the conditional waiver while the expert panel is completing its tasks. With regard to nutrient management requirements within the order, the ag petitioners recognize the public health threat facing the Central Coast region and the need to address nitrogen in groundwater. However, in light of the fact that the expert panel will be developing a statewide approach, the ag petitioners don't support the continuance of the nutrient management requirements in the interim due to specific concerns. These concerns include concerns with the nitrate loading risk level, and many of these you have heard earlier, so I won't take up a whole bunch of time. With regard to the nitrate loading risk, as you've heard before, the methodologies that are proposed were never intended to be used as a regulatory tool. These are actually methodologies used for just on-farm effective management, and as a regulatory tool, they become inadequate. They're highly simplistic. They ignore soil type. They can't be used to determine site-specific management practices, and therefore do not provide useful information or improve water quality. In a similar vein, with regard to the total nitrogen applied, which is provision 70, this provision hinges on the nitrate loading risk levels in order to report total nitrogen applied. When you're using nitrogen loading risk levels that we already know that are inadequate and speculative and faulty, then you're just going to further the faulty analysis as you continue on. And the proposed order goes through why these are faulty. So by using it, you cannot provide a precise measurement of risk to nitrate loading to the groundwater. And unfortunately, the revisions that were proposed to provision 70 in the MRP do not address or correct the fatal error that we've explained further in comments, and therefore the use is questionable and should be suspended in the interim while the expert panel is tasked with developing a workable solution. With regard to the irrigation and nutrient management plans, so these are provisions 74 through 79, 74 through 77 and 79. So we support the proposed order's revisions to Section A5 and Section B2 of Part 6 of the Tier 3 MRP, and the deletion of provisions 66 and 67 in Section B1 of Part 6 of Tier 3. The numbers go on and on. However,
It's impressive, you can say.
I couldn't remember it all. I had to read that, though.
Of course.
However, the revisions don't go far enough to address the concerns that we raised in our individual comment letters. And just to quickly go over some of those concerns, numerous components of the irrigation and nutrient management plan are highly speculative and not readily available information to complete them. So even though the proposed order admits that the information to be reported is speculative and unreliable, it still requires growers to engage in this exercise for a self-evaluation purpose. And this is questionable because we're having growers do an exercise that we already have determined will not yield useful information, but will only yield questionable results. Additionally, the proposed order retains the requirement for certification of an irrigation and nutrient management plan. We feel that this is unnecessary. The proposed order did take away the certification requirement for the effectiveness report. So it seems a little conflicting to take it away for one and also acknowledge that growers themselves are highly educated on farm with training, as well as many of them have education, as well as working directly with the crop advisors and other experts in their field. So we feel it's unnecessary to require this additional burden to have this certified. With regard to provision 74, we would suggest deleting this provision just to ensure consistency with the proposed order's findings. Provision 74 requires growers to determine typical crop nitrogen uptake for each of the crop type produced and report the basis for this determination. Earlier this morning, we heard that the regional board says there's 90% of the crops in Central Valley have typical crop nitrogen uptake values readily available. We have never heard of this number. My members have told me that they've never heard of this many values being available. I don't have the number off the top of my head. Unfortunately, I can't give it to you. We might have some growers that know a better estimate in public comment, but it's nowhere near close to 90%. So we're unsure of where that figure is coming from. And since there, excuse me, really is a lot less than 90%, there really is, we see little to no value in determining the typical crop nitrogen uptake for each crop due to the fact that there are so many variabilities, and Ms. Dunham reiterated them earlier today with regards to the soil type when you're planting the varieties of the different crops, which makes a one-size-fits-all figure or value inapplicable in a lot of circumstances.
Good question. Do you mind if I interrupt?
Yes,
I
go
can
for it.
hold my question too until
No.
the end if you like. Isn't the provision written in such a way that it allows the farmer to estimate what it is in the same way they would estimate it in terms of trying to figure out whether art or science, how much they're going to apply? Because it allows them to say what the basis is that they're using. It doesn't say they have to use an off-the-shelf number.
Right, but from my understanding from my growers, there isn't any number for them to compare it to. So if they're supposed to be comparing this value to a number that came from the UC Cooperative Extension or something, there is no number for them to compare it to.
But they do make an assessment when they plant and manage their fields, how much they are going to use, sometimes changing
Right,
over
but
time
when
during
you're-
the course of the season.
Right, but when you're trying to get to either a balanced ratio, for example, for spring mix, they wouldn't know, is this supposed to be a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2? They don't have that information to even compare it to. So actually, I am done. So those were some of the suggestions that we provided in hopes of alleviating some of the concerns we have with the proposed order, and we thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your specificity in your recommendations. Hopefully, she talked fast, so hopefully you got it all.
They were in writing too, so I didn't
yeah, I
overburden her too
Compare with
much.
what you had written, so I didn't know if they were already in writing or if they were additional. Good, thanks, that's terrific.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my same question again. I'm really into this crop advisor thing, so, and I know Farm Bureau maybe has a different mix of growers as compared to Western growers. So we already heard from Western growers, or Grower Shipper, I guess, Grower Shipper Association. So could you speak to your members, in particular Farm Bureau, on the issue of crop advisors? What is your sense as far as what percentage of them are currently using crop advisors, whether they're certified or not?
Is it okay if I ask Norm Groot from Monterey County Farm Bureau to come up? Of course, he stepped up. I think he knew I was going to call him. He would have a better
We can
sense.
ask him later. Yeah.
But from my understanding with the 7 county farm bureaus, that they are using crop advisors. I think they have a lot of the same issues that Abby Taylor Silva already spoke about in terms of finding qualified crop advisors to assist them. But I have never heard of growers blatantly disregarding the use of crop advisors. As many of you know, farmers tend to be very private people, and they don't invite people onto their land just for the heck of it. So in order to invite someone onto your land, first you're trusting them. When you're paying someone to do something for you as well, you're going to be listening to them. So to invite a crop advisor on and get information, a lot of them take that very seriously in planning on what they're going to do on their field. Norm, come on up.
What was the question? Out of the room.
Similar to Abby, the use of crop advisors, if they're using them, their recommendations, any issues they're having with them.
Okay, I'm Norm Groot. I'm representing Monterey County Farm Bureau here today. Yes, crop advisors are an important component of a production schedule, a farm plan, so to speak, for each individual farmer. As things have become much more technical and much more oriented towards understanding what the influences are on each particular crop, whether it be water, weather, climate, whatever it is, It's more important that the farmers get that expert advice, and they have been using crop advisors, particularly from implement supply companies such as fertilizer companies. And they do look at that as a valuable resource to help them with the various different crops, particularly if they're rotating crops through different fields, how that all fits together, what's left in the soil, and what can be used. So it is an important aspect. As was stated earlier, I think there is a dearth of these types of resources. We are going to need a whole lot more, and hopefully in the next few years, as the educational system comes up to speed, that we can get more of that technology and more of that understanding from those people. But right now, everyone's kind of scrambling for resources, so we do need more of that, and farmers are relying more and more on this type of input.
So I'm kind of picturing sort of a line of continuum here on various degrees of involvement, whether that be certification, reporting, self-evaluation. So I'm picturing, you know, a farmer that goes through self-evaluation that may or may not use a crop advisor. There are a whole host of advisors that are available to them. The guy next door, crop advisor, pest control advisor, UC Cooperative Extension, and then there's something a little bit more formal, using a crop advisor. And then maybe the next level, a crop advisor that certifies that the farmer is implementing measures that he or she believes is consistent with what that crop needs. And then I don't know if the next line of continuum would be necessarily reporting or not, because reporting is just providing information, not necessarily a certification. So could you speak to the availability of, not the availability, but the use of crop advisors in terms of the specific issues that different associations keep speaking to, all the different variability? Is that something that a crop advisor does right now, where they look at soil type, the history of the field, maybe the index that's available on ratios, or a manual from UC Cooperative Extension?
Sure. Well, I think what you need to realize, too, is that crop advisors have different areas of expertise, and all of them may not be versed in all those things that you just listed. And so it may take a mix of different people or consultants to help an individual farmer get that information that he needs. And I think someone mentioned earlier that there were only really 6 crop advisors on the Central Coast who are qualified to do everything at this point. So we have a mixture of different people who think they are important to farmers as far as the different qualifications that they have, and they are using them in different aspects and manners that they see possible. But I think overall, crop advisors have their area of expertise, and so it may take multiple crop advisors to really get that information to a farmer at any point in time.
I think this question may be for Darren, but you all stay there just in case he needs help. I'm a little confused over a couple of I think Tess and also said it, that the methodologies that are being used out there are not for regulatory purposes. They're really to advise a farmer on good practices. But I'm also hearing from the regional board that the compliance with the order is to be able to show in an iterative way that improvements are being made. That's my term, not the order's term. And so if you don't use the methodologies that are out there, is this expert panel going to be able to come up with some new bright ideas, or, you know, kind of how's that going to work?
So I think it is a fair statement that the hazard index and stuff like that were developed were not developed for the intent purpose of a regulatory schema. They were advisory, as was stated, and then I think there's some information in the record to that effect from even the people that developed some of those. That being said, then, of course, when you're trying to develop a regulatory program and no one specifically asked that question yet, then, you're going to look for things that look like they would help you. And of course, the regional board has chosen several that they believe would be along that line. But I think the fine point of what you're saying is, underlying that is, are these meant to be regulatory in the big R sense of the word, like meet this number and or else regulatory, or are they meant to be instruments of a best management practice that if you're doing the best you can in that best management practice, and I'm kind of invoking the stormwater sense here, do the BMP and that's what we determine to be your compliance, then, that is where a lot of these are targeted at. And I think you've hit on part of the debate and people interpreting it different ways. Some people are saying the way it was written in the order, it was regulatory and it was prescriptive and it was a number we had to meet, and others are saying that's not how they intended it, that's not what they meant, and so,
Okay.
yes. You've
So
kind of
I'm confused
right there.
properly. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
If I could add a little bit to that too, I think he's exactly right that it was not intended to be a regulatory situation developed on something that was done on a very small research scale and now extrapolated to a very large region along the Central Coast. I think what we envision for crop advisors is that they're going to have a menu of different best management practices that could be used given the circumstances of each individual field, and they may not be the same for each neighbor as you look at the various different fields going across the valley. So they're going to have to pick and choose what they think are the best management practices that they can advise these farmers on, and they probably will work, but sometimes they won't. So we're going to have to play and figure out how this is going to work. And I think a lot of this is going to be a bit of a learning curve for the crop advisors also as they go through this process and really understand what the recommendations are that they're going to be making, and in turn what the liabilities are of those recommendations should they not work.
I should follow on too. You had a second part to your question there and I didn't. It just occurred to me now about the expert panel. So certainly that is a legitimate question that we fully intend to pose to the expert panel. Are there regulatory type measures that are available or that they would recommend, or do they recommend developing something along that lines? I mean, that's certainly kind of the first time I've seen the question asked to experts specifically about a regulatory schema.
If I could follow up also with a quick question over here. So, and actually this is, I think, related to maybe what you're asking, but has been a little confusing to me. So when I read the petitions, I understood your position to be that you were supportive of the irrigation and nutrient management plans, but you were not, you didn't think it was appropriate to report those values. I might be hearing something slightly different now. Are you suggesting that, are you challenging certain provisions of the irrigation and nutrient management plan, just not, or just the reporting of those?
There are both, the actual provisions that I went through and then the reporting as well.
So both. So I misunderstood the original
Well,
position?
there's
or?
different, I don't know if we're reading Farm Bureau's, Farm Bureau and Grow Shippers had a little bit different comment letters, but I was collectively trying to put together some of our recommendations in my oral comments.
So you are advocating for actually changing certain provisions of the irrigation nutrient management plan requirements?
Let me just check to make sure I didn't misspeak. We were looking at the certification requirement. We did have suggestions to not do that. And then one of the other issues was the engage in the self exercise. We were commenting on that and questioning the need for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the environmental petitioners. And I have 2 cards, but as you come up, I have Kira Redmond, the Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, and Steve Shimmick from the Monterey Coast Keeper, and you can just tell me how you want to use your time.
Madam Chair, board members, and staff. First of all, I want to start, my name is Steve Shimmick, and I want to start by saying that I don't think that we often enough thank you for your service. You protect our water, and I mean our water, and we truly appreciate that. Many of you could maybe be making a better living out in the private sector, but you're here doing this service, so thank you. The way that this is going to work is that we do have a PowerPoint presentation. I will start, and then I will pass it on to, very quickly, to Kira, and then I will wrap up, and we will take the full half hour. So with me today is Kira Redmond, Executive Director of Santa Barbara Channel Keeper. I am Executive Director of Monterey Coast Keeper, and unable to join us today is Gordon Hensley of the San Luis Obispo Coast Keeper. We are the people who go out into the field and actually experience the water. We actually go out there. And, you know, the other side is saying, you know, they have lawyers here saying this or that. We're people that our job is to either represent people that cannot speak, like the environment, like the sea otters in my case, or kind of less tangible kind of things than a grower. And we think that there's kind of a wrong frame being offered here. The growers are saying that this order strikes at the very heart of who they are, what they do, and that, you know, I've actually heard it say that this could destroy agriculture on the Central Coast. We hope that the way you perceive your job is that you're here to protect the environment and the people of California. That's a different frame than protecting agriculture. Protecting agriculture is important. I certainly do not want to see the end of agriculture. I want it to prosper. But I'm hoping that you realize that the pollution that agriculture causes does strike at the heart, lungs, and bodies of the people that have to experience that pollution each and every day. So in the parlance, let's see. I got to figure out how to do this. Roll the wheel. So in the parlance of the State Board, we are the keepers. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Kira Redmond.
Thanks. Roll the wheel. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. I'm Kira Redmond. I'm the Executive Director of Santa Barbara Channel Keeper. And my organization was involved served on the advisory panels for the current ag waiver as well as the original ag waiver that was adopted in 2004. So we have been in this for a long time, and we have a vested interest in seeing a positive outcome for the environment. So with that, I'm going to roll the wheel. Oops, there we go. So with so much controversy and discussion over specific elements of the order, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. So what I wanted to do with my brief time today is talk about the area that Santa Barbara Channel Keeper represents and about what this order will ultimately mean for water quality there. So Channel Keeper works throughout the southern end of the Central Coast region, from Point Conception to Rincon Creek at the Ventura County border. And while not as intensively farmed as the Salinas Valley, agriculture remains a significant and valued component of our local economy and environment, particularly the Goleta and Carpinteria valleys. Agriculture is also by far the biggest source of chronic water quality problems in both of these areas. Channel Keeper has conducted monthly water quality monitoring throughout the Goleta Valley since 2002 and the Carpinteria Valley since 2010. Recall that the bulk of the elements that have been the subject of controversy in this waiver over the last 4.5 years apply only to Tier 3. Regional board staff estimate that only 3% of growers fall into Tier 3. In fact, they explicitly designed these requirements to catch only the smallest subset of growers. We want you to understand what this means in terms of applicability to our area and the persistent water quality problems that we currently face. Here's an example of what this might mean for a creek in our area. This is an aerial view of San Jose Creek, which runs from the foothills of the San Ynez Mountains to the Goleta Slough. It's considered one of the top priority streams for steelhead recovery in our region, and in fact, the city of Goleta is currently investing millions of dollars into this resource by upgrading it and retrofitting flood control facilities so that to allow spawning runs to occur again here. The yellow marker on the slide is one of our monitoring sites, and you may notice that there's not a whole lot occurring upstream of this site in terms of development. If we zoom in a little closer, however, you can see that the land use upstream of this site is dominated by irrigated agriculture. San Jose Creek is currently listed for multiple impairments, including chloride, conductivity, Enterococcus, E. coli, fecal coliform, and sodium. Agriculture is a potential source of each of these pollutants, and given the lack of other pollution sources upstream of this site, we suspect that agriculture is contributing to these impairments. However, the Ag Order ultimately only focused on nitrate and toxicity, so the reality is that none of these impairments will likely be addressed by the order. In fact, because these operations are not growing high nitrate risk crops, and because they're not within 1,000 feet of a nutrient, sediment, pesticide toxicity, or turbidity impaired waterway, and as long as these growers aren't using chlorpyrifos or diazinon, they would fall into Tier 1, meaning that under the new order, they will actually face less stringent requirements than before. But we also have nutrient and toxicity problems in our area. Here's a list of water bodies that are in our area that are impaired by either nutrients, shown on the left, or pesticides or toxicity on the right. Now, our region has nutrient impairments, and severe ones in some cases, but we don't have extremely large areas growing high-risk nitrate crops. Orchards make up the largest subset in our area, of agriculture in our area, primarily citrus and avocados, and they aren't on the list. We do have some row crops, but they don't have many operations that approach 500 acres. So what does this mean in terms of Tier 3 nutrient requirements in our area? It means we don't have any. Not a single operation will be enrolled in Tier 3 for nutrients from the Gaviota Coast to the Ventura County border. And that means there will be no nutrient management plans or effectiveness monitoring and reporting, and no associated individual discharge monitoring. But we still have toxicity listings, so we should have some Tier 3 growers. Except the order ultimately limited applicability to only 2 specific pesticides. And when regional board staff did their assessment and looked at pesticide usage data, despite all these water bodies being listed as toxic, only one single grower along Rincon Creek ended up in Tier 3. And if this grower does what most expect will happen and simply switches pesticides, he too will fall off the list. So will we solve the toxicity problems in our area with this waiver? Probably not. This is the map that regional board staff generated. As you can see, they anticipate that just one single grower throughout our entire area will fall into Tier 3. Remember, this isn't a Salinas Valley Ag waiver. It's a Central Coast Regional Ag waiver. But is this program going to solve the nitrate and toxicity problems in our area? We think not. In fact, your latest iteration will probably make matters even worse. To give you an example of how your recent order would actually weaken protections in our area, let's look at the Carpinteria Valley. As you can see, intensive agriculture, greenhouses, row crops, and orchards dominate the landscape surrounding Carpinteria. This is a graph of about a year's worth of nitrate monitoring that Channel Keeper conducted from 2011 to 2012. The horizontal red line marks the state's drinking water standard for nitrate. As you can see, nitrate concentrations in Carpinteria streams is double the state drinking water standard objective in some cases. And in the case of our monitoring site in the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, is consistently 6 to 10 times higher than the state objective. Where is this contamination coming from? It's coming from irrigated runoff and contaminated shallow groundwater. And our groundwater contamination is recent. It's not legacy contamination we're talking about. This is a photo of shallow groundwater seeping into a tributary just above the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. It's red because it's colored by artificial dyes added to irrigation water to enhance the coloration of flowers. In essence, what you're looking at is a trace dye marker test that's linking this discharge directly to agricultural contamination. We've monitored these drains throughout the summer months, and not only are they extremely high in nitrate, but we've watched them turn on and off over the course of just a 30-minute period, meaning that there is an almost immediate and direct link between these water bodies and irrigation or wastewater discharge events, leaching contaminants through the soil past the root zone. In other words, our surface water quality problems are largely the result of shallow groundwater contamination. Nearly all of the streams in our area are spring-fed systems, and to the extent that your draft order further weakens those protections, whatever semblance of applicability this program had to our area and our problems is virtually gone. Here are just a few photos of what I'm referring to. We don't have Tier 3 growers, so nitrate balancing and nutrient management plans already don't apply. But prior to your draft, we did still have the requirement to test containment ponds and to avoid percolation. These ponds are widely used to control and dispose of contaminated wastewater. and your draft proposes to eliminate even this requirement. In closing, I hope you'll keep in mind that despite the controversy and strong opposition you're hearing from agricultural interests today, the fact is that we're barely even scratching the surface in terms of addressing the severe water quality problems caused by agriculture in the Central Coast region. And for some areas, such as ours, there will hardly even be any benefit whatsoever anymore. I ask you to please understand that even if we get everything we're asking for today, and you uphold what is left of the ag order, that will not be a win for the environmental side in any sense of the word. And that has been the case for many years now. To be honest, we feel like we largely lost on this issue years ago. We lost early on in the process when individual monitoring for all growers who discharged tailwater was eliminated. We lost when riparian buffer requirements were eviscerated. We lost when requirements to achieve nutrient ratio targets were eliminated. We lost when Tier 3 was limited to only 3% of growers in the region. And we've been losing steadily on this issue with each new iteration of the draft waiver since 2010. So as I pass this over to Steve Shimmick, please remember that the water quality protections he's asking you to uphold are all of what's left of what is already a weak and inadequate waiver to begin with. Our communities in the southern part of the region will see zero environmental benefits from it. But we're here today because agricultural pollution is so egregious, and there are many communities and waterways in our region that are severely impacted. So every step forward, no matter how small, is important. And I want to apologize because I actually have to leave shortly to drive back to Santa Barbara. So if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them, or I can leave it in Steve's capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Question?
Yeah, I have a question on, so I'm assuming based on your comments then that during the development you opposed the different tiers, but I would want to just hear that directly from you. Did you support a different approach other than the 3 tiers?
We supported the tiers.
Oh, even though the
Not
result is that it doesn't target growers in your area?
Right. Steve can answer that.
So I'll answer that question first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this was an iterative process, and one of the very first iterations of the process was that all growers would have to, basically do the same thing, and we supported that. Then it progressively got weaker and weaker and weaker, and so we've been in a position of having to support what we've got. So when you say, well, what did you support? Well, we've been supportive of the process all the way through. We are left with a process that we think is frankly a process that's no longer serving areas like the South Coast very well at all. So did I answer your question? Thank you. So back to me. Any other questions for Kira before she takes off?
Well, I guess, implicit in those comments is, building on what Dee Dee's saying, is that Tier 1 doesn't protect water quality. I guess that's a bit of a strong statement and challenge to the regional board as well as us as far as components of a program that is developed through stakeholder input. So, to say Tier 1's not protective, I'm struggling with that, other than it's just doesn't require as much reporting or monitoring as the other tiers. In what ways is it not protective of water quality?
Well, I think my presentation just kind of went through the situation in our area where the criteria that apply to the different tiers and the requirements are, in many cases, less than the existing ag waiver that this is replacing.
Yeah, so, I think, that's, just say it's a surrogate, more reporting and more data and more plans for staff approval are equal more protection. I'm not sure that's necessarily bears itself out without more specific examples, because, protection might be enhanced through less, burden of reporting because you're actually out in the field doing the work. So there's sort of it's a debatable point. That's where we're trying to really right-size the program so that we're encouraging vigilance, from those who might otherwise inadvertently affect water quality. So, I just caution the, equating of reporting and monitoring to protection. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Schimmer?
So I'll continue now with some specific comments about both the, our petition and with specific comments about the draft proposal.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we petitioned because we felt that, I've got to get my thumb back here now. We petitioned that on the elimination of the requirement to meet the ratio between the amount of product applied or nitrogen applied and above that the crop requirement. We felt that it was important that growers meet that requirement, not just report it. What the State Board has done in their document is in fact completely taken out the requirement to even report the crop need. And I just don't see how that can meet, the requirement to protect degradation of our groundwater. This is the requirement that it sets the standard for how much is going to be applied and how much is ultimately going to percolate. So how can you, in essence, say, well, we're not even going to ask people to report how much the crop needs, and we're just going to kind of go by what is applied, and that gives you no sense whatsoever of the loading to groundwater. No sense, and I'll demonstrate that. So hang with me a little bit here. But we actually feel that the Agua decision actually created a mandate for you to proactively protect groundwater. And if you take away the standard that people need to meet and you don't replace it with any other standard, we simply don't understand how you are protecting against degradation of our groundwater and how you are meeting the legal obligation to protect from degradation of the groundwater. So let's talk about the importance of those numbers. Here, simple chart. Across the top, what you've got is 3 growers. Grower 1, 2, and 3, and the first 2 growers it's a double rotation of the same crop. And then on the left-hand side, what you've got is you've got what you're asking them to report. You're asking them to report the amount of product applied, and then you're also asking them to separately report, I've combined them here, the amount applied to both the soil and to the water. And that gives you kind of a total amount, and I'll use the word applied even though there's some in the soil and that's not really applied. It's available. And so here's some numbers. And so this is what you're asking them to report. And these numbers are actually, some of the growers in this audience probably will recognize these numbers. Crop A is a rotation of romaine and romaine. AB is romaine and broccoli. And these numbers are readily available in the literature, standard numbers. And then so what you have, though, is now you've got a total amount of product applied or available to that crop. What does that tell you? What it tells you at first glance is that grower number 3 is applying 30% more product than grower number 1. And actually in discussions with staff, they've said, well, we're actually going to use the amount applied to kind of be a surrogate for, the risk to groundwater. That doesn't work. Just simply doesn't work. Whoops. Uh-oh. And so what you need to know and what you need to appreciate is the amount that the crop needs. And so across the top here, I've inserted the amount of nitrogen that these crops need. And what you see is the grower that was actually applying the most is in fact in balance. And that's because broccoli requires a lot of nitrogen. And unless you knew that, unless you knew those numbers, you would never know that he was in balance and not polluting, and the guy that in the middle is actually the guy that potentially might be applying too much. So if you deny that, and if you stand back and you say, well, this is an imprecise science, this is all, kind of loosey-goosey and too loosey-goosey to kind of use as kind of, even a thought even to report. What you're in essence doing is you're denying the existence of nutrient balancing and nitrogen balancing that's been going on for decades. This is the tool that growers start out with. And growing is an art. They do, in fact, go through the year and they test and they see how much nitrogen and how much nitrate they need to apply through the season. What's important to understand is that the regional board in their original requirement was asking people to actually say how much the crop needed. It didn't say, please give us how much is cited in this ag report. It's saying, tell us how much the crop needed. And so they could report 240 for a romaine, and then through the season, the grower might say, you know, I had to apply some more because I tested my crop and it needed some more, so I added some more. They would then report that total. So they get to report the amount that is needed, and then they get to report how much they applied. And all we're asking them to do is to show their work and to think about matching, you know, the amount applied to the crop need. And we believe that they need to meet that number. They need to think about it, and they need to justify it. They need to show their work, and they need to meet that crop need. And again, without this, I just don't see how you are even suggesting that you would be meeting the anti-deg requirements of AGWA. We do support many of the things in the draft proposal. And so I support the dismissal of the due process claims. And so I think that's behind us now. I hope it is. Probably not, though. And I'm not going to dwell on this list. It was in our comment letter. But I would like to bring up several things. Specifically, I want to clarify items E, K, and L. As to E, we want to encourage growers to think outside the box. So in other words, the suggested language that the state board has actually inserted is this thing about common farming practices. Well, common farming practices are cool, but we need to stretch beyond the common farming practices. We really do need to think about new things. And so by inserting that language, I think you're limiting, you know, the responses that you're going to get. And I think we don't want to limit the responses that we get here. The farm plan should reflect creative thinking, and in fact, we think we need to reward creative thinking. As far as K,